Hey, it's Andrew. And before we dive into today's episode, most of you know the PowerShell podcast is sponsored and made possible by PDQ. I've had questions from several listeners asking, what's PDQ and what do you do? We help IT teams automate endpoint management. And PDQ Connect is our cloud-based tool for real-time software deployment, patching, scripting, remote access, and vulnerability management. It's fast, flexible, and built for people who just want things to work. If you want to see it in action, head to pdq.com/podcast and check out our interactive demo. No sign up, no email, no credit card, just a fast and easy way to explore how it works. That's pdq.com/podcast, automated endpoint management that doesn't slow you down.
Listen up. Welcome to the PowerShell Podcast, the podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community. And now, here's your host, Andrew Plaw.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast, your weekly podcast on PowerShell automation, cloud, dev, security, and more. And we're going to cover a very fascinating career journey and get a lot of PowerShell tips and cloud advice from our guest today, who is Shannon Eldridge-Kuehn. Welcome to the podcast. Let me click the right button and get you on screen here. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good. And I'm very excited to speak with you because you are seasoned in speaking and being on podcasts and being public. So already before we started recording, we were hitting it off. So
I love it.
I want to hear about your journey, though, to introduce you to the audience. So you are a consultant now in the cloud, FinOps, and platform engineering space at Ahead.
Correct.
But how did you get into IT initially? Because it's a pretty interesting story that I was kind of geeking out on as I was doing research on you.
So I didn't go to school for technology. I think if I would have, I probably would have switched majors. I feel like a lot of comp sci classes are a little dry. But I fell in love with DJing at a very young age. I'm a big electronic music fan, started going to a lot of area events, and it turned into a love of let's go try and DJ. I got tired of my developer friends trying to teach me how to support computers. And I thought I'm going to teach myself how to, set up a mixer to a computer to record a club demo. So really my entrance into technology was fueled by let's try to get something out there so I can play my music for folks. And what's interesting, and I was just telling you about this, I can do a quick shot over. There's my equipment. So it's a, real true DJ rig. And I have been DJing since I was in my early 20s. So, and then I'm going to date myself, right? For my 20 years of DJing, I wound up getting a half sleeve tattoo. It's the first hobby that my parents refused to invest in. So thank you, Mom and Dad. But it's also where I realized I had a lot of passion. And what it also did by way of, having that music fueled passion, it opened up this interesting side of I could go be in tech and didn't even realize it, right? So I had moved to Chicago in the early 2000s, and my first job, there wasn't any sort of help desk, and it was small enough, so it's kind of backup help desk. So I'm like, fixing printers, I am fixing Palm Pilots, things of that sort. So what it turned into was I moved from that job to a different job, and I had these jobs as administrative assistants. My second job in Chicago, they had really nobody there that understood anything with IT, and they were outsourcing IT, and they didn't like that support structure. So naturally, because I loved to troubleshoot, and I, had a lot of great, successes in troubleshooting and fixing things, they gave me that role, and then they invested in my education. I graduated to different levels of technical skill, and then just kind of eventually made my way outside of being internal IT to working for a managed services provider, to working for a Microsoft boutique Azure shop, to working for Microsoft, which still trips me out. It also trips out the folks that were telling me to reboot my computer 80 times to make something work. And they're like, how did you work at Microsoft before me? I'm like, I have no idea. This world just cracks me up. And then I've been at Ahead now about a little over 2 years.
So on that journey, when did you kind of find that confidence to realize? Because I know for me, whenever I got into it, I kind of thought that people who were doing the fancy IT stuff were like built differently, or they had something innately special about them. When did you kind of demystify that, or did you ever run into that as kind of a concept?
So I did. Imposter syndrome's real. And I think it's hard to level set. How do you push past it? I think we all have superpowers, right? So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is realizing we all have superpowers and we all bring something to any conversation. Because I've worked with folks who are super amazing, who get the technology, but they're the ones that kind of level up what you're looking to do, right? So I think over the course of my career, in my earlier stages, had experienced some minimal, oh, I don't think you're technical enough, or I don't think this job's for you, or I don't think you're the right fit. And I sort of Hermione Grangered it, used that as my inspiration, and I guess, funneled myself to that next level of technical skill. So I'm always the perpetual tinkerer. I'm never not tinkering. I have a whole lab that's on the other side. It's a little harder to see it, but I've got, servers in my environment. I've got a lot of networking gear. I'm always tinkering with the cloud. And I think for me, technology and understanding it kind of also became a hobby. So I fell in love with it. I was told I don't think you'll be technical enough for these types of roles. I said, watch me, and then really pushed myself, right? So it became, I don't know, it's probably similar to the folks that do a lot of marathon running or any sort of like CrossFit, right? It's a lot of diligence, a lot of getting up and staring at things that don't make sense at first and making sense of it. So a lot of what I try to do is describe things to people in ways that make sense. Like, I love analogies. I also love using the wrong analogy if I think somebody's not paying attention, right? I'll talk about, a slam dunk and like a baseball analogy. Like I had a slam dunk. Be like, wait, what? You don't hit slam dunk. Like, what do you are paying attention? Okay, great. So let's keep going. And then it's just the whole notion of kind of getting to that point in my career, right? Kind of using it as fuel, using it as getting into the technology day in and day out. Always, I guess, never being afraid to go explore something that's new too, right? I would think of myself as a generalist. I've got areas of specialty, but I think, going into the cloud specifically, a lot of my skill set has changed pretty specifically over the last probably almost 10 years.
Yeah. I imagine at some point you kind of saw that cloud was the future because you've been kind of heavily in it for a while. Now everybody kind of knows we all use cloud for all kinds of different things. But when was that sort of light bulb moment when you realized that cloud was going to be your future and kind of the future of computing?
So I had always tried to read through the tea leaves, and the tea leaves aren't amazing, right? You don't really have the full understanding of where you need to go and why. I started with Windows Server, like in the actual, one server per application lifecycle, physical server, right? Moved into virtualization, started to dig into VMware, vSphere, all the automation built onto vSphere, right? Moving down that path, and then heavy Exchange. I think I did my last major Exchange Online migration at about the 2015, 2016 era. Once I started realizing that on-prem was seemingly had a shelf life, like I think it'll probably be around for much longer, especially because we've also now realized certain workloads can't really live in the cloud. They sort of need to live at the edge. But I started realizing that the likelihood of companies being full on with IT on-prem, possibly dealing with Exchange Online or the M365 universe, and really what I'd be doing over there would just be managing user identity and data or managing servers on-prem. I sort of liked this whole notion of not having to have a server, not having to do the care and feeding for the server. And so I was lucky enough to be sought out by 10th Magnitude. They're not around anymore. They wound up getting purchased by Cognizant, like a lot of those boutique shops do. And I started my cloud journey back in the 2016 era. And what's great about that is my early entrance in was similar technology that I had been supporting my entire technical career, right? So Azure Site Recovery is where I started. And so to me, once I realized the value of not having to replicate to a different server that I was also doing care and feeding for, and that I could just destroy the server or, redirect replication or something of that sort, it started to just open up my mind to this notion of there is no ceiling when it comes to cloud. I think a lot of people believe there is. I would challenge them and I would say, I don't think that's exactly the case. I think what you're going to learn is you're going to learn how to stand up infrastructure, how to deal with code, how to hit APIs, because that's really where we were moving. We just, infrastructure folks like myself didn't really see it that way when we were supporting servers on-prem. So I think it was just an interesting moment of self-reflection, realizing that I think servers are kind of a dying art, and they probably are to some degree. But again, we're still seeing that repatriation effort now where workloads are coming back on-prem, but they're sitting at the edge or sitting at a colo versus, I don't think anybody wants to deal with owning their servers anymore. I think that's probably the big realization. And now we're going through an interesting wave of technical advancement right now where AI is seemingly displacing folks. There's a number of rifts that are happening. So I don't know. I mean, I hope we all figure out what we're supposed to figure out. I all hope we figure out where we need to land too. But it's been an interesting journey of trying to learn what you need to, know what you need to, be an expert in the areas you need to be an expert in, but then know when you're out of your swim lane and could, find an opportunity to dig deeper.
Insightful. You mentioned some workloads are better on-prem. Could you speak to that a little bit? Because I think people are confused about that topic.
Sure. So I think of it like this, right? I used to work with the Azure Blob Storage team. And when I was working with them, I got exposed to kind of HPC workloads, right? And some of those need the on-prem, oomph, unless you want to spend a ridiculous amount of money hosting in the cloud, right? And that was kind of like the balancing act. What made the most sense? Like, how much do you want to invest on-prem? It's a sunk cost. How much do you want to invest in the cloud? Also, there's a lot of IoT out there, right? A lot of edge devices that need to kind of live out there and be closer in line to the cloud, but it really can't have direct connection to cloud. So things that might live on a mobile network, right? And that could be unreliable dependent upon what time of day, how the sun's coming down, like the weather patterns, et cetera. So it makes more sense for that data to be to kind of be fed into the cloud on a schedule. So I think those are some of the workloads I could think of that might need to remain on-prem. There's always that question of SAP is a little bit nebulous, those types of big applications, sometimes maybe even Epic too. It's very much so something we focus on at Ahead. It's workload suitability, right? What could go to cloud? What could go to cloud as is? What could go to cloud? And what do we have to think about in terms of refactoring? What's the level of effort to refactor? There's a lot of things you've got to think about. And I think a lot of folks thought the easy button was lift and shift. Well, we're just prolonging the inevitable. We're doing the same thing we've been doing for 20 plus years, probably not at this point, replicating servers to a different environment and having that application live on a server when it may not necessarily need to be on a server. It could even be SaaS too. I have some customers who are like, nope, it's SaaS first. IaaS is a last resort. So we'll go through and we'll figure out what they have. Could it live in the SaaS instance of whatever they're trying to do with their kind of, it's usually kind of like the productivity suite, something along those lines.
So I think cost comes up as kind of a concern with cloud stuff sometimes.
Right.
But do you see people moving to cloud the wrong way, right? In a way that maybe isn't sustainable financially, or what are some things to keep in mind with that process?
Sure. I think, so the fundamentals are still the same, right? Compute, networking, storage. That really hasn't changed. It's knowing the different resources you'll put together to make an application work, right? And it's really understanding what you need for resiliency. So I think a lot of customers do the lift and shift. So vSphere did us a great job. It allowed folks to go and build things programmatically, but it allowed you to have this notion of decentralized IT. So you had middleware teams going and spinning up a web server that had 4 vCPUs and 16 gigs of RAM. And guess what? That web server really didn't even need that much oomph. But you go and you lift and shift it into the cloud. The hyperscalers take that metadata and they give you like for like. They don't remember that vSphere does or they don't know that vSphere did a great job of sharing resources, and so it's going to give you like for like. So I think a lot of times what I've seen in supporting customers, at Ahead, before Ahead, and at 10th magnitude, customers assume this is going to be great. Like for like is perfect, and all of a sudden they get their first bill, and it's a very different story, right? And I don't always need to have these servers on. The always on world of vSphere is sort of dying out too as customers are embracing more cloud. So, you're seeing patterns of reserved instances, committed use discounts, savings plans. Those are kind of it's sort of table stakes for production workloads, putting things on a schedule, even on an on-demand type schedule. So a server's off unless somebody goes and requests access to that server, and then it gets fired up by way of automation. Some of the beauty of having the ingenuity of cloud at kind of your at your fingertips. So I think of it as, yes, customers have definitely done a lot of lift and shift. They paid for it. Now we have FinOps. It's a whole practice, and it's fascinating. So I'm getting ready to go to FinOps X next week. So a lot of times what we tend to see at those conferences are these customers that go through these massive windows of optimization, right? And we see that with our customer base too. There's a level of effort to kind of get to that optimal state to contain costs. It's not out of the realm of possibility. It just takes time and effort, as well as kind of understanding what workloads are suitable for cloud, as is what's the kind of future state. What does that look like? So
it sounds like to make this migration, you need to know about the services that you're going to need. And
Correct.
There's a lot of them on different platforms.
I know there's almost too many.
It's a lot. But a lot of the kind of same concepts are shared between different cloud vendors, like, AWS, Microsoft, Google. But Is it fair to say that you sort of need to be an expert to confidently make that, or bring in the services of an expert? Because I feel like it can be kind of daunting and confusing, and it could be implemented the wrong way. Is it fair to say that?
I think so. I used to call myself your digital shepherd, right? I worked a lot with, supported customers during their early stages of let's lift and shift, supported them as they transformed, as they broke apart central IT, decentralized IT, put the solution architects with business units. There's a lot of different things customers have done to kind of get the acceleration that they were looking for, right? And so I think of myself as I've always been there to kind of say, this sounds great, this sounds bad. This is something I want to bring somebody else in to talk about a little bit more deeply, just because of the fact that, I only know so much. Like I know a lot, but I only know so much too. And I think, I tried to play the part of maybe that it's a terrible, I'm always a little about using a sportsing analogy, but I think of myself as the quarterback. I know who to pull in, who to go and talk to. I think sometimes that's where customers have struggled because they want to take it on themselves. It's not a bad thing. But I think there's a finite amount of knowledge, a finite amount of time, and there's also fires that customers are working with. So that's why I've gravitated more to these kind of consultative roles where I've supported customers and tried to give them, like I think when I was billable, I'm not billable in my current role, but when I was billable, I'd say things like, you get a 2-for-1. You get a therapist who's going to walk you through this and make you feel comfortable and confident about this new tech because it's ambiguous. Anxiety a lot of black folks have a lot of anxiety. Like, what do I do next? As well as I've got the technical acumen to like be hands on keyboard too, as well as kind of, direct the strategy and think through what it would take to get a customer from point A to point B.
I will speak to it. You have great communication skills. I feel empowered. I want to make the migration.
What's even funnier is I had somebody ask me this really, like, how do you feel so confident talking in front of people? And I said, well, my background is actually in communication studies. That's what I went to school for. So I graduated with that as my major. My minor was English. And then I competed in high school forensics, which is speech, if you're not familiar. So people are like, you did what with dead bodies? I'm like, no. Forensics, like oratory, like oral speech. I did that as well as debate. So I've been speaking in front of audiences to varying degrees since I was about 14, 15 years old. So it's a long time.
I want to circle.
I wish it was less time.
Well, hey, I'm curious because for me, some of my confidence from speaking has come from the bad times where things go wrong and it ends up being okay at the end. The thing I've dreaded kind of happens, the demo crashes, whatever the case may be. Is that true for you as well? Like as you got more exposure, you've seen things go well, not so well, and you're kind of okay at the end. Did that help build your confidence?
Very much so. You and I were joking about this before we got on today, but there was one time I was doing a live session and the saliva went down it's the same hole, right? But it went down the wrong hole and I started coughing and choking live. And it's like the last thing you want to have happen ever, period. You're just like, I'm turning red. I'm getting embarrassed. I'm live. People are tuning in. So I finally just stopped and I was able to kind of like, catch my breath. And I said, well, that's proof it's live, right? It's like, so I think like if you can stick your landing. Oof, I was struggling on the right analogy there. If you can stick your landing and do it with like a funny self-deprecating here, like I love to make fun of demo gods. I'm like, do they know that I'm trying to do a demo live? It seems like they do know, and this is very unfair. So I've even gotten so far as to also have like videos if it's something that I just need to like illustrate a point. Like, so I've done that, right? Like, because you never know where you're going to be presenting. You never know what Wi-Fi is going to look like. You never know, can they even see what I'm trying to show on my screen? No, they cannot. Let's pull a video up. Let's magnify it. So I've got like backups that I've built out as a direct result of running through these. But in the earlier stages, it was, let's just rely on wit, which is good and bad. Sometimes I remember somebody was like, I feel like the jokes weren't great. I'm like, well, I didn't know what to do because the demo failed. So it was jokes. Sorry.
I feel like, I've noticed recently there's kind of a tension in any kind of tech talk, and it probably applies to other things as well. There's a certain tension that the audience feels, so they'll laugh at different jokes. But I think that when we have those authentic moments of like, oh crap, this is totally live, things are going terrible, I think it helps break that tension and make everyone feel a little bit more comfortable in a certain way.
Yeah. Well, I would love for everything to be well rehearsed, orderly. I think everybody would, right? That's how you present yourself. That's how you want to be thought of as a credible resource. But you never know. And the world of delivering these sessions live, it's the cornucopia of things you don't even think of. It's sort of like when I was DJing too. We had a lot of similar things, right? So that's why I think going through the notion of being a DJ, and I would rather not show up to a gig with my equipment because of the fact that unfortunately, people will drink and drinks will be spilled, and then it's your equipment that's getting destroyed. So I was always like, well, if I'm going to go and play at a venue, I want them to actually have the equipment that I'm playing on. And that was always painful, right? Especially as we moved more digital and we were, like embracing like, oh God, I'm blanking on it. All of like the digital things, Serato. Oh my gosh. Oof.
Oh, Serato sampler?
Yeah, Serato. So if you get like Serato or any of those, sometimes the connection points, you have to like do a couple of different tries and maybe it doesn't sound great at first. And you've got to just make sure you have enough time to prepare. So I think that's something too, is like preparing, rehearsing. You can't rehearse enough. And sometimes even if I have like most of it like in my head, maybe I'll just rehearse the demo before I go into it too. Because I think sometimes that like the live demo is always that questionable moment of, will it work? Will it not work? What's going to happen?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of, if you're going to be doing some public speaking, put in the prep work so you can feel confident. And then if you do all the prep work that's needed, it is what it is. It's going to go how it's going to go, but you can feel confident in knowing that you prepared.
Correct. And I think a lot of it too is, even if you don't feel like you're ready for it, or you feel like you're scared to do it or something of that sort, I can't stress, you should probably do it. If you think you have things to share, I think the biggest thing I learned was I had a lot to share, and I didn't realize I had a lot to share because I thought I wasn't the most technical person in the room. And it turns out none of us are. I think that was the interesting thing of,
True.
Wow, the thing I'm worried about is what everybody else is worried about too. Interesting. So once you have those realizations, it starts to feel a little bit easier and less daunting. I also have some friends who I have been trying to convince they should do it when they take their glasses off. Like, I'm not as blind as they are, but then like they have like so they can't see any person's reaction. And they're like, yeah, but I'm going to totally follow on my face because I'm so blind. And I'm like, okay, well, that was another option, but it's never like met with, yes, I'll totally do that, because there's usually a reason why, everybody's blurred. So
yeah. I want to circle back to something you mentioned, which was FinOps. And
Sure.
I'm just curious how that differs from cloud ops or just cloud stuff in general.
Sure. It's like a related sibling. In fact, sometimes you might see teams out there that are cloud ops and FinOps oriented teams. So we have an offering where we kind of blend those two together. We have an offering at a head where it's just FinOps. And so FinOps by itself, it's sort of cloud operations with the financial elements in mind. So you're doing things like fixing tags, normalizing tag data. You're looking at IaaS. You're looking at PaaS resources. You're looking at reserved instances, savings plans. You're looking at governance, so that all of a sudden things don't just show up out there with the wrong SKU, without tags. So it's a lot of like the cloud engineering with just the finance focus. And so now you can kind of see why sometimes it blends into the notion of also just being cloud operations too, because really, if you think about it, that the team handling FinOps could easily handle your cloud operations too, if you were, at the sizable company where you could have a lean team to do both of those functions.
You also mentioned earlier being a quarterback, which I think is an interesting analogy, but I think it's also important and highlights the role that community and having a network plays in things, and the importance of not acting like you always know the answer. So I always encourage people to network, because there's so many people who are just kind of like, they're into PowerShell, but they're just by themselves. Maybe they engage here or there, but I think it's incredibly important to have a network of people you can bounce ideas off of. Like, you'd be surprised how many people will just bang their head against the keyboard for 10 hours when a quick message to a friend or a community forum of some sort would have solved their problems.
Yeah.
Have you always been sort of quarterback oriented and network focused, and I guess aware enough? I feel like the Dunning-Kruger thing kind of comes into play, where
You're not
a lot
wrong.
of people early on may think they know all the answers, but as you get more experience and exposure, you're able to know what you don't know.
Yeah. I think for me, I've always felt like I work for strong team or work with strong teams. And so it's so if in a team-based atmosphere, you have to feel comfortable leaning on your team. It's just like going back to sporting analogies, right? Like, you have to know when you're going to run the play, when you're going to throw the play. I'm also not that great with football, so I'm going to stop with those analogies right now. But knowing that, it's hard to know the roles you play. That's why I mentioned everybody's got a superpower, right? And so what I think of as like kind of my superpower is trying to get to the heart of the problem, trying to sort through what is actually happening, and then knowing when I'm out of my element, right? I know I can take certain conversations pretty far, but you start to listen to things, right? You start like, okay, I know who I can go to for this, and then knowing that your network would probably have a resource you could fan out to. So I used to use Twitter a lot. I don't use it as much now because not as many people are on there the way they used to be. It's very unfortunate, but I used to go out there a lot. I used to ask a lot of questions, and that's how I kind of, reestablished like that community notion of, hey, I'm in over my head. I'm dealing with IPv6, which is always this nebulous spot with somebody that's not been a networking person. I would just go to the networking resources. And so I think, approaching it with the mindset of you're not going to know everything, I think that's probably the thing I hit on the most, right? And you learn a ton once you realize that you don't need to be the expert in everything, right? And if you have listening conversations, you can start to like pick up on things to go deeper on, things to go experiment with, and questions to ask for the next time, right? If you're working with customers, like I worked with customers most of my career, so that's the way I think of it.
Yeah, and I think maybe customers who don't know that much may not appreciate it, but those who are smart, they can tell when someone's BSing. And I think they oftentimes appreciate, hey, I'm not sure. Let me check on that and get back to you.
So, and I learned that too. That was something that I was commended for, probably almost 10 years ago. I said it to a customer, and my peers on the call, they didn't have the answer. I didn't have the answer. And I'm like, we're going to go figure out the answer. We just don't have the answer. So rather than me try to make something up on the fly and sound like I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, I'd rather come back to them with something more comprehensive that made sense. So,
boom. So to many folks who are listening, you've kind of made it. You can be a North Star. You've worked at Microsoft. You have a pretty successful, important position, working on cool technologies, building skills, while also, having a good job at the same time. What role did your public speaking, your blog, your just public presence play in your career success, do you feel? I know it can be hard to track sometimes, but
I'd say a bigger part than I think most people think of, right? We were talking about a little bit before we started. I think that it might be maybe one of my superpowers is the idea of formulating thought in a way that folks can feel engaged. It's that, going back to my earlier comment, I probably would have switched, majors if it was comp sci, because it would have been very dry. I think if somebody like me would have presented to me, there might have been more of folks like me going through that as their background. So I think of it like this. Communication pattern styles, the nature in which you present yourself, I think that's very much so key for anything. The more confidence you have, the more you're going to move into more senior level roles. I have a lot of folks who come to me and they've got, 45 certifications. Like, that's great. I get them on the phone and I'm like, we need to work on some of this like presentation soft skills. And I really we wouldn't call them soft skills. They're more difficult than that. Like reading the room, having a conversation, active listening. Man, I could write a whole book on active listening and how there's a lot of people just don't want to do that, right? You have to listen, you have to ask questions, you have to be engaged.
Yep. Connect to what they're saying and then be curious. And yeah, there's a lot there that I think whenever I talk to people, it oftentimes is their big takeaway as well in their career. It's like, yeah, the technical skills are one thing, but actually implementing them, you have to have these other skills because companies are run by people. It's not just zeros and ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I know you have a meeting here coming up, so I want to say thank you so much for joining us. A lot of insights were dropped. Maybe we can do a part 2 in the future.
We should. I enjoyed this, and I think it's hilarious that we got connected. So I love that we did.
If I might hit you up for some DJ recommendations.
You should.
It's been on my burner for a little bit here after getting an impromptu DJ session from Trent Blackburn. I was at a conference. He's like, hey, I got some audio equipment in my car. We walk to the parking lot and boom, ABBA starts playing one song to the other. We're just grooving in the parking lot at like midnight outside of a bar. So it's been in my mind ever since then, but thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for the opportunity. It's been fun. So we'll do a part 2, maybe even a part 3. We'll figure it out. I love these things and I'm getting back into the swing of it now that my son's a little bit older and I feel more well rested. That's what happens when your kid starts to get older. You've more time to sleep and actually seem like you know what you're talking about versus feeling very, fits and spurts.
Yes. And the memory maybe starts to come back too.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you everybody out there for listening. Give us a like, comment, subscribe. Check out PowerShell Wednesdays for more practical PowerShell application sessions. And we posted a bunch on YouTube recently. Drive safe if you're driving, all that good stuff. Take care, everybody. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.